And joining us now here on the program as we take a look at the markets, and we know we have USDA numbers coming up on Friday. Well, ahead of that, we're seeing more estimates come out, and this time from our friends at Farmers Business Network. They've released their plantings report with some differences, some pretty key differences thrown in there ahead of the USDA numbers. Here to walk through it with us, we welcome in our good friend Kevin McNew, Chief Economist at Farmers Business Network. Kevin, great to have you back on the show, sir. I hope you're doing well.
Always a pleasure, Jesse.
Let's dive into this FBN plantings report, and I'm very curious to hear about some of these numbers, your farmer surveys on the video feed. I'll just pull up the overall numbers here that you guys have found, and looking at these, I know some key differences from what USDA is putting out there for estimates. What are your thoughts, just overall reaction to the survey results you got from your farmer customers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the takeaway we got from our 2,000 farmers that gave us their survey intentions or their planning intentions for the spring was that they were leaning a lot more into corn and a lot less into beans than what the market and USDA flagged in February. So, we have pegged a 92.5 million acre corn number. That's up from the forum number of 91. And also our bean number quite a bit lower at 84.5 versus the forum in February at 87.5. Now, what I would say is we've been doing this. This will now be our third report, annually in this March intentions report. A couple of things that I want kind of everyone to understand is, the March 31st report is the most unpredictable report of anything USDA does. No one really has a good idea. We can't throw machine learning and AI at it. It really comes down to, farmers in all kinds of different geographies, all kinds of different economic circumstances. And where we've been well positioned at FBN is we've been able to crowdsource farmer data and get back to them this meaningful intelligence ahead of a key report. So I'm not going to say we're going to be right, but I can tell you the last two reports, we've been very directionally accurate. And so, I would say, be prepared for some big changes, big shocks here.
Well, Kevin, as we look at some of the changes here that you guys have found, and I'll pull up corn as well here, just looking at the state by state changes. You mentioned a lot more farmers leaning more corn versus soybeans. What's maybe driving that? Has it been, the ratio getting better when it comes to price of corn versus the price of soybeans on the board? What are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, when we started kind of thinking about acreage, and back in the fall, we were really talking to a lot of farmers. We even did some kind of smaller version surveys. What we heard was pretty clear increases in the upper Midwest. In corn, we saw Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota farmers really signaling that because of the problems they had last spring, they were going to come back really hard with corn, and that confirmed. So of our 4.5 million acre increase, 2 million of that is really coming from Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, trying to come back from last year's planting disaster.
Hmm.
But what kind of surprised us as we got the surveys coming in this last month is a lot of farmers, not just those farmers, but all farmers were kind of really shifting into corn, and leaning out of beans. Even our Iowa farmers, trying to move a little more into corn. We always hear this from our farmers. They love to grow corn. And, I think the market was giving them just enough signal in the fall and early winter. That's really when they're making those decisions. I know the market analysts like to look at corn soy ratios in March, but trust me, no one's making decisions in March on corn soy ratios. They've already made those decisions 3 or 4 months ago. So what I'd say is, fertilizer prices, nitrogen prices were starting to soften in the fall. And I think farmers just kind of rolled the dice and went pretty heavy into corn and came out of beans.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the other crops out there as well. You mentioned the Dakotas and Minnesota adding more corn there. What's that going to do to spring wheat? Walk me through just some of what you're hearing when it comes to spring wheat acres here with the report, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, Montana, my home state, we have had so much great soil moisture, so much snow that they're ready for that snow to melt and plant some spring wheat. So they're going to come hard. But other key states, maybe a little, higher in South Dakota, a little lower in North Dakota, we didn't see a clear signal of big changes there. I think what, also needs to be addressed is, the winter wheat number that USDA threw at the trade in January. I mean, that number
Mhm.
was a shocker for everyone. And so, we were shocked by it. Everyone was shocked by it. We think USDA may have, overshot their skis a little bit on that one. So we could see winter wheat come down a little. We've seen it in the data now on 2 surveys that it's not as strong as USDA thinks. So maybe that is indicative. As we move south, the other thing is cotton. USDA looked for massive declines in cotton acres. They had penciled in their forum around a 10 million acre cotton number. That'd be a 30% drop in cotton plantings. We just didn't see that from our farmers. Yeah, there's some decline in cotton numbers, but not anywhere near the wholesale shifting out of cotton like USDA and the trade expects. So I think those things combined sort of give us the numbers we landed at, and we'll see what happens on Friday.
I should pull up as well, sorghum acre change too. I know we're seeing a little bit of an expansion in sorghum in some spots. I think especially South Dakota. I know your numbers pulling that down just a bit, but sorghum obviously another piece of this equation. You mentioned cotton in there and spring wheat as well.
Yeah.
Something else to look at here, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shortage really of high priced crops right now. The last couple of years have been really good for farmers. I know there's a lot of media about how this is the highest cost of production year. I'm not sure where they're getting those numbers. I mean, in actuality, the numbers we track from our farmers are actually better than last year. Chem prices are coming down. Fertilizer prices are coming down. So I actually think it's going to be, shaping up to be a pretty good year cost wise, versus last year, let's say. So, you know, I think, my takeaway is most analysts generally stick to the February forum numbers from USDA. We don't see much deviation on average from those numbers. And that's the
Mhm.
case going into this report, which means there can be big shocks. The second thing is, we don't expect, much in the way of cost of production to really be a hampering item this year because things have gotten a little bit better over the last 12 months.
Well, Kevin, I know obviously all of these numbers that come our way here in March is kind of the starting point for spring planting season. Then you got to start worrying about weather. I know there's some concern about the heavy snowpack in the north. Could that delay planting? Could we see prevent plant because of that? Some of the dryness in the south. So, as you look out here and think about some of those factors ahead, some of those maybe fringe acres for, say, corn, soybeans, etc., what's your take on that and what we could possibly be looking at here? Have you heard anything from farmers as you've done these surveys?
Yeah, I would say, as I sit here in Montana, usually we're starting to see some grass, and I'm buried under 3 feet of snow. So there's no planters rolling here anytime for sure. And I can tell you, the Dakotas, just the problem areas I mentioned for last year are likely going to be problem areas again this year. So I think there's a lot of wild cards, even in Indiana, talking to some folks out there, things are pretty wet, which on the one hand is good. We're
Mhm.
recharging some of those droughty soils that we've had. But yeah, it could be an interesting planting season. And so, big corn number is what we're thinking. That may get a haircut as we move forward.
Well, and thinking about all the numbers in general and heading into a very what's most likely going to be a volatile report day on Friday. It typically always is. Not to mention it's the end of the month, end of the quarter too, so that's going to add to the volatility. What are any thoughts you would have? Any recommendations for farmers as they're thinking about their marketing plan, trying to manage risk heading into a volatile time in the trade?
Right. I mean, our lean is obviously bullish beans, bearish corn going into this report. One thing I want to point out to your viewers and listeners is March 31st is always the biggest trade day of the year. Volatility is always sky high. I like this statistic. In the corn market alone, we generally see $1 billion made or lost in that one trading day. That's the equivalent of what's bet on the Super Bowl. That's how big the money is. That's how big the moves are, generally speaking. And I think we're in line for something like that today. Now, bring it back to the farmer. I want to be, fairly caught up on new crop sales. I know farmers sometimes like to roll the dice. They don't want to move too much at this time of year for 2023 or their new crop, but you know, get to 20%, maybe even 30%, depending on your cost of production and where you're sitting. I do think there's the potential that, this could be deflationary for the months ahead. We've had some strength. We've had China step in and buy some things. But these types of reports have the potential to be watershed marks and change the paradigm, at least for the next month to 6 weeks as we get into the spring weather.
Well, a lot of things to consider. And of course, we appreciate the time and the analysis as always. Folks can learn more FBN.com. With that, Kevin McNew, Chief Economist at Farmers Business Network. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse.